This is a prediction, not an endorsement. I've predicted about as many Republican as Democratic victories, including Donald Trump in 2016.
What's going on, party people? In new space now. I've moved the studio 10 feet from the downstairs bedroom out to the living room here. Now I'm in front of the fireplace. It's not a green screen. Yeah. So anyway, today we're going to be going over predictions for who's going to win 2024 between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. We're going to go into a lot of detail, a lot of data, and just kind of give my opinion on what I think is actually going to happen in about 2 months. Before we do, please remember, like and subscribe to the video. It helps me out massively. It's completely free, and it means the world to me. Okay, so first off, we've got Steve Kornacki. He's the data guy over at MSNBC. He usually does a really good job with breaking down in great detail what the polling looks like in all of the states. So we're going to go through what he thinks is the race is looking like right now. And he thinks it's actually going to be pretty close. So we'll just take a look at what he says and then we'll react.
All right, Amish. Yeah, a couple ways to look at this race as we come out of the Labor Day holiday nationally. This is the average of the major recent national polls, and you see Kamala Harris with a 3-point advantage over Donald Trump. A couple ways you could look at this. If you're a Democrat, you're obviously happy that Harris is ahead of Trump. You're also happy that this is an improvement from where the race was when Joe Biden was the Democratic candidate. He'd pretty much been trailing Donald Trump all year in the polls. So a reversal of that with Harris as the Democratic candidate. But if you're a Republican, you're not necessarily despairing when you look at these numbers. In fact, you could probably take some solace in them because Donald Trump is no stranger to being in this position on Labor Day. In fact, this position, being down 3, is better for him than it was the last 2 times he ran. In 2016, he was down on average by 5 points to Hillary Clinton at this point. And of course, he came back to win that election. And in 2020, he trailed Joe Biden by high single digits at this point. Trump didn't win in 2020, but of course, he made it very, very close in the Electoral College. And that's one of the keys here. A question for the fall and election night itself is, does Trump still have that advantage just because of the geographic distribution of his support in the Electoral College, where he could afford potentially to lose the popular vote by 2, 3, 4 points, something like that, and still potentially stitch together 270 electoral votes? So let's take a look at the road to 270. We're going to be using this one a lot between now and Election Day. 7 states in gray here. These are the core battleground states. 6 of them were blue states in 2020. They went for Joe Biden. 1 of them was a red state in 2020. That's North Carolina. That's the only state where Democrats in this battleground are playing offense. In the other states, the Democrats are trying to hold on to what they already carried in 2016. Now, in terms of the polling at the state level, it's all pretty close right now. Democrats, Kamala Harris, seem to be doing a tick better in the 3, let's call them Great Lakes states, in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Now, that's probably the most direct path for Harris if she's going to get to 270. Let's just play it out. If she were to hold those 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, there you go. You see it. She's at exactly 270 electoral votes. This would also require her, by the way, to hang on to that 1 congressional district around Omaha, Nebraska. They give out the electoral votes by district there. Biden had carried that in 2020. It's a district, very suburban. It's a lot of demographics that have been favoring Democrats. They would need to hold on to that, too. But that would be 270 electoral votes. Now, where it gets dicey for Harris is, while I say the polling's been a tick better for her in these states, and it was a tick better for Biden when he was the Democratic candidate, too. These are also states, Wisconsin especially, where we saw, in Michigan, too, where we saw some of the biggest polling misses in 2020 and even back in 2016. A lot of theories why, but these states are demographically similar in that they have large blue-collar white populations. And the question there is, are pollsters able to reach necessarily all of the sort of a representative sample of the Trump supporters from that demographic in those states? It's been an issue before. If it's an issue again, then it gets tricky for Harris, especially if she were to lose. Let's see this one here, Pennsylvania. If Harris were to lose Pennsylvania, that's the biggest of the swing states. It has 19 electoral votes. To compensate for losing Pennsylvania, even if she's getting Michigan, Wisconsin, she's going to have to win two of these states from the Sun Belt to get over the 19 that she loses by not having Pennsylvania. And if Trump gets Pennsylvania, his simplest path would just look like this. Hang on to North Carolina, which he already won, as we said, in 2020. It was close, but he won it in 20, and then go to Georgia. The margin in Georgia in 2020 was just about 12,000 votes, just under 12,000 votes. The polling for Trump, when you look at all of these different battleground states, it's tended to be the best for him or close to the best for him in Georgia. Extremely close, but if Trump were to do that, Pennsylvania, hold North Carolina, get Georgia, and there you see it. He'd be at exactly 270 electoral votes. So those are probably the most efficient paths for each candidate to get to 270. But you can see there's all sorts of other combinations that are possible. And the good news is we got more than 60 days to go through all those possibilities. So we are just getting started.
Okay. So Steve Kornacki goes through a whole lot of data there, but the main thing is the path to 270, which is how we have to actually predict elections because it's not based on the popular vote. Now, unfortunately, the country that we live in, we don't have a real democracy. We have, this dumb system where land votes, and it's massively skewed to the Republicans with the Electoral College. So it's a race to 270, and every single election comes down to a couple of thousand votes in a handful of swing states. So he says that the easiest way for Kamala to get there is through the Great Lakes states. He talks about Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Big caveats on what might happen there. So Michigan, it does look like it's leaning slightly Democratic at this point. It leans towards Kamala, but barely. And the big contingent in Michigan that Kamala needs to deal with is the uncommitted vote. So if you don't know what that was, this was like over 100,000 people, I believe, were all going to the polls during the primary and voting uncommitted at that time to Joe Biden based on his policy towards Israel. There's a lot of Muslim people that live in that state. And so that's a huge issue that they need to be able to get those people. It's a key demographic that they need to be able to win in order to win Michigan. So he's saying the easiest path would just be Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania in order to get there. Outside of that, he's saying that if Kamala were to lose one of those states, like say Pennsylvania, she would need to make up ground in some of the swing states, and he points out Georgia and Arizona and Nevada, North Carolina, a couple of other ones. Now, my take on this is that as far as swing states go, the Democrats have been working very, very hard in states like Georgia. We just talked about this with the whole voter registration surge and the fact that over 175% of new there's a spike of more than 175% in new Democratic voter registration, and the majority of that is coming from young black women. Now, my point to that is Georgia has a very large population of black people. It's like almost 30% of the population there. So that's huge. Plus, we did the story, I guess it was yesterday or 2 days ago, about Marjorie Taylor Greene recognizing how much work the Democrats are actually putting into Georgia and how many new Democratic voters are registering in the state of Georgia. Not to mention, this barely made the news, but there was a mass shooting in Georgia, and it was in a high school and killed like 4 people. But that's not going to help the party that is massively pro-gun, and every time there's a mass shooting, they go out there and say, the reason that we need more guns is because if there was a good guy with a gun there at the school, we could have stopped the shooter. So I don't think that's going to play well in Georgia. But back to the point, is if Kamala Harris lost a state like Pennsylvania, which the margin is very thin there, although I do think it leans Kamala Harris at this point, would she be able to make up the difference in some of these other swing states like Arizona, like Georgia? Okay. I covered in Arizona what's going on at the Senate level. Ruben Gallego is running against Kerry Lake, and he's up by 8 points right now. I just don't see a situation in which the Democratic nominee for Senate wins by 8 and the nominee for president doesn't. And then you also need to consider that there are 10 states, I think, that have abortion as a direct ballot initiative, and Arizona is one of them. Arizona is one of them. Nevada is one of them. Both of those are kind of swing states, states that the Democrats need to win or would definitely like to win in order to comfortably win against Donald Trump. And this is an issue that is absolutely destroying Republicans no matter what. I mean, ever since they overturned Roe v. Wade, they have been getting wiped out in these midterm elections and special elections, specifically due to the issue of abortion. The other big thing that I want to talk about is the money gap and the enthusiasm gap between the two parties right now. So the money gap, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have raised over $500 million since they started. So it's been like a month and a half or something like that, maybe. But they've raised over $540 million since their campaign kicked off. That is a massive amount of money to raise in a very short amount of time. Now, I could get into all of my criticisms about how money in politics works, but the reality of the situation is it's extremely, extremely expensive to run for president, and you need a lot of money in order to do so. And it's not just been from large donors and PACs. They've got grassroots money coming into the campaign as well. And so just speaking on where the money is coming in and where the Democrats are spending the money is also really, really important. So Democrats right now are outspending Republicans in a huge way. In Michigan, the Democrats have outspent the Republicans $55.2 million to $6.6 million. Okay, so almost, 10 to 1? In Arizona, the Democrats have outspent the Republicans $34.9 million to $9.9 million. In Wisconsin, the Democrats are outspending Republicans $33.1 million to $3.5 million. In North Carolina, the Democrats are outspending Republicans $26 million to $2.8. In Nevada, $19.5 million to the Republicans $1.4 million. And in Omaha, the district, it's $7 million to $0. So the Republicans are not even trying to spend money there. So that's a big, big difference. That's a huge gap in the amount of money that the Republicans are dumping into this. Now, this doesn't include everything, but like at this point in the election, to have that much of a discrepancy between the two parties and where they're spending money, specifically with where they're spending money, that's huge. And I have a little bit of an idea as to why that might be. So Trump has a lot of legal issues that he's been dealing with this year. And of course, he blames all of this on a witch hunt. And it's just everything is so unfair. I've been treated so unfairly. But the reality of the situation is that Trump has fucked up in spades and it's finally catching up to him. And so a lot of the money that his campaign has raised is getting diverted into dealing with his legal issues. So obviously he had the 4 indictments that, he's only been through one of those, which he lost all 34. He was found guilty on all 34 felony charges. So already lost that one. And then let's see, the E. Jean Carroll judgment. So he was found civilly liable of rape or sexual assault against E. Jean Carroll. He defamed her and was ordered to pay like $5 million. And then he couldn't keep his mouth shut. And the day after he got ordered to pay $5 million, he turned around and did it again. And they ordered him to pay like $83 million. So Trump is in the hole $88 million just because he can't keep his mouth shut. And then you also have the case in New York with his businesses. So if you're not familiar, Letitia James, the AG up in New York, went after Trump for business fraud, tax fraud, insurance fraud, all kinds of stuff. And he was found liable of all of those things. And if you're not familiar with the story, quick recap, Trump basically used to massively overvalue his properties whenever he wanted to get more favorable loans for himself, for his businesses. And like, it was absurd. You know, it wasn't like a tiny bit. Like, he would overvalue things by like hundreds of millions of dollars, like his assets. And even to the point where like he would say that his apartment is over 30,000 square feet when it's only 11,000 square feet. And this is easy stuff to go back and audit. So just absurdly lying in order to get more money. And then at the time when tax season rolled around, he would massively undervalue those assets in order to pay less in taxes. So Trump lost that case and is on the hook for, I believe it was $355 million for the New York case plus interest. So Trump is in the hole by almost $500 million, and the Kamala Harris team has raised over $500 million in a very short amount of time. So the money gap is huge. The enthusiasm gap is also there because Republicans are excited to vote for Donald Trump, but not as excited as the Democrats are to vote for Kamala Harris. And we see that kind of data in the massive voter registration surge. So the excitement on the Democratic side is much higher. Now, lastly, as far as Republicans go and Trump goes, he's done nothing to add to his coalition. He's done nothing to gain more support. Everybody knows who Donald Trump is at this point. He won in 2016 based on a populist lie. He said, "Oh, I'm going to keep your jobs here." And then he ended up outsourcing over 200,000 manufacturing jobs. Joe Biden brought back over 800,000 manufacturing jobs with things like, you know, the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS Act and things like that. So people know who Trump is, and he's done nothing to bring more people over to his side. He's doubled down on being more and more and more divisive. So the people who are with Trump are absolutely with Trump 100%, but there's a very slim chance that he's going to pick up independent voters or undecided voters based on, you know, like attracting them for some kind of specific issue, just because Trump hasn't done anything to expand that coalition. Then we have Professor Alan Lichtman, who's made the rounds a couple of times this election cycle. He is famous for going on a bunch of shows and saying that the Democrats should not replace Joe Biden, which I think made him lose a lot of legitimacy in the eyes of certain people, just because he's got this 13 keys to the White House prediction model. And I mean, to give him credit, he's correctly predicted 9 out of the last 10 elections, but his model is very, like, it's unflinchingly rigid. And it's interesting because he doesn't use anything like polling. He thinks polling is a joke, but he only goes based off of his 13 keys, which is how he decides if the person is going to win the White House or not. So he gives his prediction. We'll take a look here real quick, and then I'll respond.
Breaking development this morning, this in the race for the White House, as the Nostradamus of presidential predictions is out with his pick finally for who will win the White House. And he's been right 9 out of the last 10 elections. The local historian making the national news right now, Alan Lichtman, joining us live with his choice and why he made that pick. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We've been waiting for this. We're not going to wait any longer. Let us know what you decided.
You know, my prediction system is unique. And as you said, it's been essentially right for 40 years. I would say 10 of 10, but I'm not going to relitigate 2000 here. And the way it works is it taps into the structure of how elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And if 6 or more of my 13 factors go against the White House party, they're predicted losers. Otherwise, they are predicted winners. And I finally come to my final prediction and concluded that the White House party, the Democrats, now represented by Kamala Harris, would not lose any more than 5 keys. Thus, my prediction is Kamala Harris will be a precedent-breaking president of the United States, the first woman president in U.S. history. There are 2 keys that are still very shaky that I've kind of split, the foreign military failure and success keys. It's conceivable, given how fluid wars are, and there are two wars going on, both of those keys could flip negative against the Democrats, but that would still, even in that dire scenario for Democrats, leave them down 5 keys, still 1 key short of a predicted defeat. That's
okay. So Alan Lichtman says in no uncertain terms, he predicts that Kamala Harris will be the next president of the United States. Now, at the time when he was going around and he was telling everybody that, you know, the Democrats need to keep Joe Biden, they need to double down on Joe Biden, they're being cowards, they're being spineless. It's like the people who realize that that's a losing cause were not just bedwetters. Like, Joe Biden was down on all the polls, and this guy doesn't really believe in polling. It's a snapshot in time, yes, but you can't deny the reality of the trend, which was that Joe Biden was polling worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, especially after the second debate, where it just looked like Trump was going to run away with it. Now, he did add one caveat, which was that if the Democrats replaced Joe Biden because the pressure on him was just too much, that the way that they should do it would be to pick somebody and have a consensus candidate, not have a contested convention, which they did. Now, a lot of people are upset about that. A lot of people argue the only reason that Kamala Harris is in the position that she's in is because it was just handed to her. And yeah, she didn't win a primary. It's true. But the excitement around her is undeniable. And the fact that it's not Joe Biden and we're not picking between two old white guys, he acknowledges that is something that has created a lot of enthusiasm. Now, he puts in his keys like it's just a vote up or a vote down on the White House party, and it's based on a bunch of different things. I think the factors that are going to still affect the election the most are going to be the foreign wars vis-a-vis what's going on in Israel and the failure that is happening there. The question is whether or not voters blame Kamala Harris because she's part of the Biden administration, or whether they vote for her anyway because they understand that Trump would be the exact same, if not far worse. So finally, my prediction on this election is based on a number of things, but I would say that based on the amount of enthusiasm on the Democratic side, based on the amount of money on the Democratic side, which is kind of a proxy for enthusiasm, based on the direct ballot initiatives that are happening in key states like Arizona and Nevada, based on the fact that Trump is not someone who's added anybody to his coalition. Like, he has not done anything to try and like reach out and grab more people to come in from like the independents or the undecided voters. I don't see that there's anything that's attracting new people to that campaign based on the massive voter surge, voter registration surge that we're seeing, especially among key demographics like young Black women and Latino voters. I think that Kamala Harris is like a 60-40 shot at winning. Now, it's still going to come down to tens of thousands of votes in a couple of swing states. I think she wins the popular vote easily by at least 3 to 5 million. But it does come down to which swing states do the Democrats win the Electoral College in. And I think based on the amount of work that they're doing in certain states like Georgia, amount of work that they're doing in order to excite voters, the amount of money that they're spending in order to get their message out to more people, the ground game of the Democrats right now seems to be much, much, much more aggressive than the Republicans. I think that Kamala Harris wins, and also based on everybody knows who Trump is at this point. Okay? Everybody knows there's not like I wonder what a second Trump term is going to be. Everybody knows. Okay? And 2020 specifically was a referendum on Donald Trump. And Donald Trump seriously mismanaged the pandemic. He was an awful president in a lot of ways, but like the thing that really was the nail in the coffin for him was COVID-19 and the way that he handled it. I think if COVID didn't happen, Trump probably would have won a second term easily. My thinking on this is if you look at the momentum, that part is clearly in Kamala Harris's favor, and it has been ever since she entered the race. if you look at like how Trump is dealing with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, it's just been these pathetic, flaccid attacks. She's a communist and he's questioning whether she's really black and all of this other stuff, whereas they've been sticking mostly to policy. So like, I think the strategy favors Kamala Harris over Donald Trump. Just a ton of things in terms of like where I'm looking at that. And then lastly, with the direct ballot initiatives. Now, this part can be weird because I think when Trump won in 2016, there was a direct ballot initiative for $15 an hour minimum wage. And Trump won Florida, and also the minimum wage vote won in Florida, even though Trump and the Republicans directly oppose raising the minimum wage. In fact, he said that, I think that the wage is too high. Imagine like a billionaire being like, I think $7.25 is too much. But like, if you look at direct ballot initiatives, and the thing that is the most salient issue for Democrats in this election and in the midterms and every special election, it's been abortion. And you've got direct ballot initiatives on abortion in a couple of swing states like Arizona and Nevada. For all of those reasons, I think that the conditions favor Kamala Harris to win as opposed to Donald Trump. I still think it'll be close. I still think that it's going to be very close on the Electoral College. It's going to be decided by tens of thousands of votes in a handful of swing states. I think she'll win the popular vote easily, but I think that the election itself will be close. And but my assumption is that because of those factors, it will be Kamala Harris that will win the presidency. Anyway, guys, let me know what your thoughts are. I know it was a long one. Really appreciate you sticking around to the end. If you like this kind of deep dive into the actual data and breakdown and giving my opinion about it, remember, like, subscribe, helps me out massively. It's totally free. It means the world to me. And then also you can share the video around with other people. At the end of the day, everybody has a 50-50 shot of guessing who's going to actually be president. But yeah, the real way is you have to actually drag somebody out with you to vote. Make sure you vote, and then make sure that somebody within your circle is also going out to vote. Guys, really appreciate you sticking around to the end, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.